Hi, welcome. We're all set to get started here. Just to remind you today, we are going to be reviewing ways that you can screen the markets and be on the prowl and look out for stocks that are poised to pick up their pace to outperform the broader markets. So possible candidates for you. The screening that we are going to be reviewing would be recommended to do on a daily basis, but for those of you that are not as active in your investing and your trading, the very same screening can be done on a weekly basis as well. But today we're going to be focusing on daily screening, primarily end of day screening after the markets close, so that you can prepare yourself for the following day, have a watch list, so to speak. So let's go ahead and get started. For those of you not familiar, this is Mary Ellen McGonagle, and I'm the founder of MEM Investment Research. I do have a lot of years of experience with the equity markets, and a lot of that time was spent on Wall Street with William O'Neill and Company. He's the founder of Investors Business Daily, and during my time there I worked with professional portfolio managers around the world, and I was teaching them the O'Neill methodology as well as advising them on the broader markets and on individual stock selection. More to the point, a lot of my work there and even now was reviewing thousands of charts on a weekly basis, really looking out, being on the prowl for that next big winning stock. For those of you not familiar, Bill O'Neill's work does center around the concept of momentum, and that is going to get you into faster moving stocks. But again, it's all with an eye toward getting you into these outperformers. So that is my background, certainly on the equity side. And as said more recently, I do have my own research firm. I still work with institutions, but over the last several years, I've directed my energy more toward helping self-directed investors. So it's really super exciting for me to be able to share my many years of experience to help, again, self-directed individuals and others fine-tune their trading so that they can outpace the broader markets. So today, before we begin, very quickly, just need to state that I am going to be going over a number of stocks. We're going to be looking at various charts, but none of the information is intended to be a recommendation. It's very much more for educational purposes. So I did need to make that statement. And so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to review what we are going to be covering today. And for those of you that have any questions, there will be ample time at the end to review any kind of questions that you might have. But I do request that you wait and reserve them until we are completed. But the first thing that we are going to be covering today is exactly what are some of the characteristics of a stock that is poised to go higher. Of course, you're going to need to have some understanding of those characteristics so that you can then screen for them. So we're going to be reviewing several different characteristics that can be helpful as far as pointing you toward these stocks that could be poised to go higher. And then also I'll share with you some areas and websites where you can quite easily screen for these various characteristics. When working and sharing my knowledge, I like to point individuals toward websites that do not charge a fee, so that you can have easy access. So the websites I'll be showing you are accessible to everyone. And then also, how long should you stay with the stock? And there are going to be several individual characteristics necessary in order for you to determine how long you should stay with the stock. Certainly one of them is going to be your investment approach, if you are longer term in nature, as opposed to an intraday trader, but there are going to be other characteristics as well. So we will go ahead and get into that. And then using the broader market to give you the confidence in your trading. So regardless of individual characteristics, you are going to have the need for confidence in your ability to define where we are in the broader markets, because of course you do need to have the broader markets in an uptrend as your wind at your back, so to speak, so that will help propel your individual stock as well. And I will have a special offer at the very end of this presentation, so I urge you to stick around for that at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. This first, what I'm showing you here is a daily price chart of the S&P 500. And the primary reason that I am showing you this is for that very characteristic that I talked about. You need to have a sound opinion regarding the broader markets before putting any new capital to work. Now, I'm just going to walk you through where we are in the markets now and what we have seen, of course, historically. So again, a daily price chart. Each bar here is representing 1 day of price activity, the high, the close, the high, the low, and the close and the open. And so back here, as many of you may recall, this is a little bit of November, but certainly December, and we can see January, just an absolutely rather parabolic type of move. There were a lot of individuals, particularly during that January period, there was the fear of missing out. So there were a lot of people piling into stocks. For some of you that may remember, for instance, Google was up, I believe, over 20% in January, which was unheard of. So with this excessive move, at some point there is an anticipation that the market would, at the very least, pull back. But the markets did more than that, and of course this was a tough time for a lot of investors. This was the correction, which is defined as a broader market down at least 10% or more. So we did have this correction. Now, more recently, during this period of time, this is February into March, and then of course this late March into April period, all rather difficult, sloppy, quite volatile. I will tell you, within this period there were pockets of strength. For those of you that, any of you that are here now that may, I do have a bi-weekly newsletter where I advise on the broader markets as well as individual stock selection. So those that were following our newsletter were actually able to make quite a bit of headway, because there were definite pockets of strength, and the screens that we're going to be reviewing today are the types of screens that would have told you, for instance, software, consumer-related stocks were really doing quite well in ignoring this broader market malaise and decline here. But let's go ahead and move to where we are currently. And I did point out here that the price broke back, and this is this week. The S&P 500 broke back above these key simple moving averages, and this is a metric that we work with, as well as a number of other traders. You may have read about this significant break back above the 50-day moving average, and that is quite bullish. I can go into a lot more in the way of detail as far as the markets hitting lows and then having higher lows and so forth. But for simplicity today, the fact that during this week on Wednesday, the index did break back above the 50-day simple moving average is quite constructive. So with that, if you were to follow that type of logic, you would say, well, we are in the markets are potentially back in an uptrend, so it is safe to put new money to work. So that's the kind of overview, the kind of information that can really be helpful to you. The NASDAQ actually broke above last week, so that turned positive earlier than the S&P 500. So all of that is going to be quite critical for you to, again, give you that confidence in your investing, because again, the broader markets and that backdrop are really going to guide individual stocks. As the market goes, so too do most stocks. So I did want to take a minute just to point that out to you as a backdrop and a critical component in your trading. And then from there, let's go ahead and talk about some of the characteristics that I mentioned to you that can be helpful in pointing you towards stocks that could be poised to outperform. So this very first item here is that a stock is at or close to a new high in price. Now, I should clarify that because it's not an absolute new high. Rather, it is a 52-week new high in price is what you can screen for to help you out. And the reason that you do want this stock to be hitting a new high in price, and we can point this out as we get into examples, but realistically, when stocks are starting to advance, if they're not at a new high in price or the recent high in price is nearby, that is going to create what is called overhead supply. This will make a lot more sense. I'll show you some examples. But that overhead supply is going to be people that bought at that prior high, and as the price hits a new high, if it's less than 1 year in time, oftentimes those buyers from the prior high will use the new high to sell the stock. So it will create resistance. So again, if it's a new high in price that is 52 weeks or longer, the odds of the advance continuing are higher. So that's one way that you can screen. So we will look at that, the stocks that are hitting a 52-week high in price. That can be one of the characteristics to key in on. And then let's take a look. The next item is the stock moving on volume? And the reason that we want to pay attention to volume is because this extra volume is telling you that institutions are in there buying that stock. And that's critical because when we look at volume in the markets, 80% of daily volume is institutional trading. And that's important to know. But even more importantly is the fact that institutional money is considered smart money. And by that I mean these guys, the big mutual fund firms, hedge funds, firms, they all have analysts. They are meeting with management of these companies. They have their feet in the ground. They are visiting the companies. So they are going to have a bit more in the way of intel. So oftentimes if they begin to accumulate a position in a stock, it is with maybe a little more knowledge than the average investor might have. And then also the fact is when an institution does begin a position, it's not going to take place in one day. Depending on the size of the firm, it can take several days, sometimes even several weeks. So that is going to be another positive characteristic as far as the potential for the uptrend to continue. So you want to pay attention to the volume. And then also you want to check the position of the price versus its key, and I'm not sure why the word's not there, but the key simple moving averages. So we talked about that with the broader indexes. It's equally important that the price of the individual stock be above that key simple moving average, because if it is below it, oftentimes, and if that simple moving average is in a downtrend, that's going to act as resistance. So you want to check the position of the price of the stock versus its simple moving average. So let's go ahead and also what I wanted to talk about is trend indicators. So what I mean by that is, in addition to screening for stocks that are in a 52-week high, you want to screen for stocks that are up on volume. Once you garner that list of stocks that are hitting those, as an example, two characteristics, you then want to look at the stock chart and see where other indicators are. Are you getting confirmation? Just because the stock is up on volume on a given day by no means does that mean it will continue to go higher. You are going to need to have those other indicators in place on your chart that will confirm the potential uptrend. So we will go ahead and get into an example of that as well. So here is an example of what we would be ideally keying in and be looking for. This is Best Buy, BBY, and we're looking at a daily price chart. And what I wanted to point out to you are three things. One is the simple moving averages, as well as technical indicators that I've found to be very, very powerful in helping with decision making. So here is Best Buy. What I'm pointing out to you, I mentioned to you that during the recovery period of the correction, there were stocks that were defying the broader markets and were managing to be up on volume, hit new highs, and so forth. This is one of those stocks. It's Best Buy. So what I'm pointing out to you here is on this particular day in the beginning of April, Best Buy was up, I believe, 3.5% on this day. But what we want to look at is the fact that Best Buy broke back above this 50-day simple moving average. That's your red line. And it was after having already broken above this green line is your 10-day simple moving average. For those of you not familiar, these moving averages are quite simply smoothed out versions of the price action. So this is the 10-day is taking the last 10 days of trading activity. The red is the last 50 days. So in addition to paying attention to the position of the price relative to that simple moving average, you want to pay attention to the slope. Ideally, you want these simple moving averages to be trending upwards. So let's go ahead and get back to this one day here where it broke back above that 50-day simple moving average. And so this actually hit up the up on volume screen on that particular day. And so again, interesting, great, it was up on volume. But again, you want to look at its position relative to the simple moving averages. Also, your other key indicators. Up here I have what is called an RSI. It's a relative strength indicator. And it's another indicator where you want to pay attention not only to the slope, but also to the position. If it's above this dashed net neutral, that is positive. So we have two very interesting characteristics taking place. Down at the bottom, I have another key technical indicator. It's MACD. That's your moving average convergence, divergence. This black line is the moving average and the red is your signal. So a cross of the black above the red is positive. However, we're not quite out of the woods with the MACD because ideally you want it to be above this zero, net zero. But you do have two of the three signals flashing positively, and you can see subsequent to this move, the stock did pull back again below this 50-day. So again, we're not entirely out of the woods, but certainly this should hit your watch list as a stock to key in on and pay attention to. So further on down, we get all systems in place, so to speak, because we have this shorter term crossing above the longer term simple moving average. That's called a golden cross. Your RSI is positive, and now your MACD is above this zero. So again, from here, this particular up on volume screen would have certainly at least gotten this onto your watch list. And then from there, you can then key in on other indicators that would get you into this particular stock. So this is just, again, using history as a guide for what you would want to key in on using a daily price chart. So how can you screen for these trending stocks? I talked about this before, looking for stocks that are either up on volume, they're hitting a new 1 year in price. But let's go ahead and do this before we get a little bit more into that, into these individual screening. So I talked to you about the importance of having a strong opinion about the broader markets. Are they in an uptrend? Are we still in a recovery phase from the correction, and so forth? But there is other information that can be really helpful as far as informing you on what to expect in the markets on any given day or any given week. So I'm going to just sneak out of here for a second and get over to some other screens that we can use so that you can key in on what to expect on a given day. So this is a website. It's called FinViz, F-I-N-V-I-Z. And what I wanted to point out to you, for those of you that are active day traders, one thing that you can quite easily key in on here is I just hit the Futures tab. And so right now it's still keying in and showing you the activity for today. This is a snapshot of different indices. We have energies, gold, currencies, and so forth. But for those of you that, again, if you were to pre-market, want to get a feel for what is expected, these futures, this is the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, the Russell. It will show you what the Nikkei in Japan did, but these are all color-coded. So if it's a bright green before the open, it means that futures are pointing to a very positive day in the broader markets, and then the darker colors indicate either flat or a negative open. This bright red is super negative. So this is a very simple thing that you can add to your daily to-do list. Just take a quick look, see what the expectation is in the futures. And the other thing that can be very critical in the broader markets is what is expected on the economic calendar. I apologize, this is going to have a lot of flashing ads, but this is Bloomberg. It's one of many different services that are available out there to you that can tell you what is upcoming on a given day, on a given week within the broader markets and the economic indicators. The reason I'm pointing you to Bloomberg is because they have a system where they very nicely color code so that you can key in on what indicators are more important than others. So what they have here, for instance, this is the PPI, Producer Price Index, that came out last week. This is this past week's economic calendar, and you can flip over and get the upcoming calendar for next week. But again, this petroleum status report, this has really picked up in importance because of what's the activity with oil. So that has a star on it. But this is, again, accessible to everyone. So you will want to, Consumer Price Index came out on Thursday because of the concerns with inflation. So both the PPI and the CPI are critical. Jobless claims also important with an eye toward interest rates. So quite simply, this is another to-do that you would want to add to your list prior to putting money to work. Just keying in on what kind of indicators, what kind of reports are due out, just as another guide to you for your decision making. So any kind of economic news. And then lastly, Market Watch. They have really picked up their pace, so to speak. They do a lot in the way of pre-market blogs, and then throughout the day they're going to keep you tuned into what is going on, where there are areas of strength, and so forth. So I did want to go ahead and point that out to you as more ammunition in your tool belt, so to speak. But let's dive into how you can screen for some of the characteristics that we spoke about. What I'm taking you to here is called StockCharts.com, and this is a wonderful source as far as providing you with intraday and end-of-day preset screens that can point you toward stocks poised to outperform. So this is the initial interface page. So what you would do is go to the upper right hand. They have scans. And so from here, you will then go to an area that says predefined scans. Now, there is quite a bit more that you can do within this as far as defining the scans even further, but for ease of use, these predefined scans are really super helpful. So here we are looking at they are both bullish and bearish, but let's take a look at some of these predefined scans that StockCharts is sharing with us. This is as of the close today. So we talked about stocks hitting a new 52-week high. That's going to be one that we can key in on. We will go ahead and dig in and take a look at that. Strong volume gainers. We talked about the importance of volume. And then they have these bullish moving average crossovers. As you may recall, when we were looking at Best Buy, I talked about the 10-day crossing up above the 50. This bullish 50 crossing above the 200-day is equally powerful because what you're looking for is that shorter term key moving average crossing up above the longer term. We mentioned that MACD when we were looking at Best Buy. So this particular screen will show you that bullish MACD crossover where the black is crossing over through up above that red signal line. And so as we go on, you can move on. There are certainly many other different, but really for our work today, we're just going to key in on these top screens here. So before we actually dig in, I wanted to point out to you some other ways without digging in and looking at the individual stocks. There are ways that you can use this initial interface to give you intelligence about the broader markets. And that is, for instance, today, 482 stocks hit a new 52-week high. Now that might not mean much to you, but if you were an individual, if you were to put this on your to-do list, so to speak, you would know that that number of stocks hitting a new 52-week high is quite a bit higher than it has been in some time. In screening and looking at this on a regular basis, I can tell you that oftentimes there were maybe 172 that were hitting a new high, 140 and so forth. So we certainly are seeing an expansion in participation of this market, and that is a bullish sign. So again, right there, you can use that simple number as giving you information. And then let's go ahead over here with StockCharts.com. They've also broken it down by the index. This is the NYSE, the NASDAQ, OTC, and so forth. Toronto Stock Exchange is there. But at a simple glance, you can see that the NYSE did have a large number today, hitting a new high. I will tell you yesterday, the NASDAQ had a large number. So quite simply, you can really get a feel for where the strength is in the markets by looking at which indexes are showing the most strength. So today, after the close, the strong volume gainers were in the NASDAQ that clearly had the most of the number of names within it that were up on volume. So that's quite telling. So why don't we take a minute and go ahead and drill down just a little bit further, and I can give you some more pointers as far as how this can be helpful in driving your investment decisions. So here we are. This is today's list of the NASDAQ, those stocks that are hitting a 52-week high in price, 148 stocks. And that's really interesting, but that's an awful lot of stocks. And as an individual, of course, you want to be able to somehow narrow it down. I will say for my work, I tend to scan it by the size. I tend to traffic in larger stocks that are more liquid. For those of you that want faster moving, you might screen and look for smaller. But let's take a look at one other way that you can sub-screen, if you will, within this NASDAQ. So we talked about the way that the screen is listed currently, but there is a way that you can then very quickly get a sense of sub-strength. within. So what I've done is I've resorted this by sector. For those of you that are super familiar with the markets, you'll know that the markets are broken down into 9 different sectors. So of these 148, it'll take about 60 seconds. You can scroll down and really quite simply, just by eyeballing this, you can get a sense of where the sub-strength was today within the NASDAQ. Now, the NASDAQ certainly is heavily geared and weighted toward technology, so you will oftentimes see more technology than other. But if you had looked closely, you may have noticed today that there were a lot of healthcare stocks within this grouping. So of interest from there, hopefully I'm not getting too granular, but I can't emphasize enough how important this can be in your work. You can then break it down by industry group. So we've seen the sector. What about the sub? So we can see a lot of biotech stocks were up today on volume. And then we can drill down further and see that a number of medical equipment, medical supplies. So this is drilling it down further. It's telling you, okay, healthcare, that's interesting, but what areas within healthcare? And I will tell you again, those that subscribe to my newsletter, we've been involved in a number of these medical equipment and medical supply companies. I'm seeing a couple of names from our list, because this has been a strong subset area within the markets. The semiconductors, not so many are up on volume today. So that's very telling. But take a look at software. It's just wonderful how you can drill down. This is for me. Hopefully you're able to see this as well. But really, software is another super strong space in the market that we've been able to capitalize on, and it continues to show up strongly. Now, how will you use that? Well, as you want the backdrop of the broader markets to be the wind behind your back, you also want to be in groups that are exhibiting strength, because you are much better served to be in a weak name in a strong group as opposed to a strong name in a weak group. Group attribution does weigh heavily on a stock's performance. So I just wanted to take a minute and point that out to you as far as ways that you can quickly be more informed as far as the broader markets and what is going on. So from here, what I wanted to do is I had identified a couple of stocks from yesterday, May 10th, after the close, that had hit some of the screens, either a new high or up on volume screen. And we can take a quick look at the charts of those stocks, and you'll be able to see rather quickly whether the stock potentially could move forward. We'll key in on some of those characteristics that could be very helpful in giving you insight. So what we are looking at here is a 15-minute, an intraday chart, and this can be helpful as far as pointing you toward the stock's potential move during the next day. So this is FANG, it's Diamondback Energy, and this particular stock did hit the new high. It very briefly at the open, it hit a new high. So the stock did hit the screen yesterday. So for those of you, if you were screening and looking at that list, and it could be of interest to you because it did hit a new high in price, you will want to look at the intraday. So this, again, it hit the list yesterday, but if you can, this is what you would have seen after the close yesterday. So ideally, despite the fact that it did hit a new high, using those technical indicators, using the action of this price, you could be informed that there was indeed a downtrend. So yes, it hit a new high, but it was not a healthy looking stock. So with this 15-minute, we are using the same technical indicators and overlays. So on the top, we have the RSI. And so you can see the RSI did break below this net neutral. We talked about that being negative, and now it's trending negatively. So that's not a good sign. The stock did break below these key moving averages. So for the 15-minute, I use an 8 and a 13 time period simple moving average. I find them to be quite effective. But take a look at the MACD. We now have a negative crossover with the black crossing down through the red, and now we're really in negative territory here, and the day has not even closed. I think this is a very obvious example. We'll get into some more subtleties, but again, just because it hit a new high, you are going to want to marry that with these technical overlays, and indeed this stock was down almost 5% today. So we can take a look also. Let me go back to the weekly. We can take a look at that very same stock on a daily. And this is FANG yesterday. And you can see where on a weekly, on a daily, and on the daily I have a 10-day simple moving average, and the red is the 50. So yesterday's price action, if you're looking at a daily, you may think that we are fine. It's a pullback to its simple key moving average, but that intraday is going to provide you with more insight. I found that after the close, if you are looking to enter a stock, that intraday can be really quite helpful. So let's take a look at another example of a stock that yesterday hit the I believe the new high. We can take a look. Yes, this is CHEF. It's Chef's Warehouse. And this stock gapped up on earnings yesterday. This is May 10th. So it hit the up on volume screen as well as the new 52-week high screen. So it did hit both screens, but again, you can see that throughout the day, despite this gap up, the stock did break below these key moving averages. It did have a negative MACD crossover, and then the RSI sloped downward. Now, today was not the worst day, but it was down 1.6%. So what I'm trying to point out to you is how oftentimes these 15-minute charts can be very telling as far as providing you with insights into potential moves the following day. This is another stock that yesterday it did hit that new high in price. It's FFIV, F5 Networks. And so you can see that this is after the open. For the first hour, the stock was buoyed. It did quite well. But as the day progressed, you can see how the RSI was starting to slope downward. It did cross into negative territory prior to yesterday's close. We also did get this negative MACD crossover signal as well. So again, in going through these lists, you are going to want to marry what you are seeing as far as either up on volume, hitting a new high. You also, of course, will want to see positive characteristics with the technical overlays. So let's look at a different stock to guide you as far as stocks poised to go even higher, and hopefully you can see a very clear difference here. This is ULTI, the Ultimate Software Group. And again, we're keying in on yesterday. So yesterday, this stock hit the new 52-week high list. But take a look at the position of the key technical overlays compared to the other three that we just reviewed that were quite negative. You can see that the RSI remained above this net neutral. And also your MACD, even though it kind of waffled a bit here, it's still generally in positive territory. It's above this negative net neutral. And indeed, the stock did go on today. So it was up 1.2% on the day. But ideally, you can see how telling these intraday charts can actually be as far as in guiding your investment decisions. So we can look also for those of you that are longer term in your investment horizon. Let's take a look at a daily price chart of the Ultimate Software Group. And what I did want to point out to you here is the fact that this stock started hitting that new 52-week high screen back in here. So you could have gotten earlier signals for this, and the RSI on the daily is trending positively, as is the MACD. This is another phenomenon that I wanted to point out to you that's occurring rather frequently today in some of these faster moving stocks where the momentum can last. This is taking us back to the end of last week, and in fact the stock, let's take a look at the weekly, and we can see that the stock is up 4% for the week. But more importantly, what I wanted to point out to you is the fact that the type of market that we are in right now is supporting multiple multi-day uptrends. But you do want to marry that daily chart with, for those of you that are inclined, that intraday chart, because it really can give you just that added extra information when you are looking at these charts. And there were a couple of others that I did want to point out to you that are also hitting these new high. Now, I tend to look at these screens frequently. This is a Biomed. This is one of the stocks that we have had on our list for over a year now. It's been a real outperformer. But what I wanted to point out to you is this move up on volume. The stock was up over 11% on that particular day, but take a look at the advance. It's continuing to march to new highs. The reason I'm pointing that out to you again is to highlight what type of market environment we are in. So how critical it is for you to uncover that stock that has explosive growth characteristics, that is technically sound, because we are in a period of the markets where you will be rewarded for uncovering those types of stocks. So we can take a look at that. ABMD is a Biomed Inc. And this is a 15-minute intraday chart. And the reason I'm pointing that out to you is take a look at the activity over the last several days. Your RSI is remaining virtually up above this net neutral, so we're still in positive territory. Your MACD is above zero, and as long as the stock retains a presence above these key moving averages, you are well served. We did get a bit of a dip here, but the RSI still remained positive. So hopefully you're able to see visually some of the characteristics that can help you with your decision making, because again, in addition to getting those screens, you are going to want to be able to marry the characteristics, using technical overlays to help guide your decision making. So I did want to go ahead and get back to our screening and what you can look for and how you can screen. So what we're going to do here is just go ahead and review what we've been looking at here. So you do want to look for stocks that are up on volume or that are hitting a new one-year high in price. So those two I pointed out to you can be two of the most powerful. There are also sub-screenings with using technical overlays. So we talked about and showed how you can use technical overlays to confirm whether that stock that hit the list is a good candidate for you. As always, this is something that I just feel needs to be mentioned. You always want to have stop losses in place when trading the markets. This is really critical information. It's going to depend on your risk tolerance as far as how much of a loss you would be comfortable taking, but being able to take your losses, keep your profits is really going to keep you in the game. It's going to keep you confident and enable you to continue actively trading the markets, and then using weekly metrics for longer term traders. So today a lot of our focus was on intraday and daily. That is very important for when you screen stocks, but you can also use weekly screens that will, once you identify, similar to that best buy in the very beginning, once you identify a potential winning stock, you can then keep and stay in that stock by using a weekly screen. So we can just sneak back over here and take a quick look. This is a biomed, and so we can take a look at the weekly chart. So this is a very smoothed out price information. And so again, once you identify a stock, it's fundamentally sound. It's hitting a new 52-week high, such as in here. I'm going to take a brief second and switch out these simple moving averages. So on the weekly, you're going to want to use a 10-week and a 40-week. So the 10-week is 50 days and the 40-week is 200 days. So this is much more information. So if you once identify that stock, you want to just look at the charts every week. You don't want to be in front of it every day. This is the type of chart you will want to use because you can see this is obviously a stock that's been doing quite well. It's a good example, but as long as it retains a presence above the upward trending key simple moving average, you are well served. So we can use any number of examples. Best Buy, this is again your 50-day simple moving average, and in line with the broader markets, it did dip, but your RSI still stayed positive and your MACD was still in positive territory. So all of this, for those of you, if this is newer to you and confusing, I do have other courses, I have other tutorials that will really help really fine-tune your ability to interpret these different indicators for different time frames. I actually have a full course. You can visit my website at meminvestmentresearch.com. That's where a lot of that will be located. But just to give you a brief overview, hopefully it's not too much information here. So let's go ahead and see what conclusions we can draw from today's work. And the first is you do want to begin your screening with a sound opinion of the broader markets. And I mentioned that my newsletter is very much centered around that because it's important that you have a concept of where we are, what direction the markets are headed so that you can invest wisely. And then also you do want to identify stocks that are based on your risk tolerance and investment style. So by that I mean, for those of you that are adverse to risk, you may want to stick with those larger stocks. I will say smaller cap stocks are coming into favor, but they are super, they can be volatile. So you need to know that. What can you tolerate? What is your style? Are you an intraday trader or longer term? And then I always say know yourself. If you are devoted, do the screening. And it's going to really help inform you. If you don't have a lot of time, subscribe to a newsletter. Again, mentioning mine. I do the work for you and mark up the charts. Can be reached again via that website, meminvestmentresearch.com. There's a contact me. I always enjoy hearing from people and am more than happy to provide further insights, further information. So yeah, be sure and reach out. And I want to thank you again for taking the time today and look forward to seeing everybody soon.
Hey, Grayson Rose here with StockCharts. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, consider giving it a like down below, maybe leave us a comment, and if you're new to the channel, you can subscribe at the link up above. We're gonna bring you daily content from an incredible collection of technical analysts and financial experts.